Okay, so you guys have been sending in some really interesting stuff about exercise and how it can, help people manage diabetes. Seems like a lot of you are really keen to get to grips with how that actually works.
Yeah.
Like the science behind it. And I get it. I mean, when you're looking at a ton of research, it can be a bit overwhelming to figure out what the key takeaways are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what we're going to try and do today. We're going to break it down, pull out the most important points about how exercise can actually impact diabetes management, and hopefully, make it clear and useful for you guys.
Yeah, exactly. We're here to kind of simplify some of the more complicated science behind it all, connect the dots, so to speak, between exercise and what's going on in your body when you have diabetes,
Right.
and ultimately give you a better understanding of, how you can take action.
Yeah, and it's such a super important topic, right? I mean, especially when you look at the numbers. Diabetes UK, they released some pretty startling stats for 2022-23. Over 5.6 million people in the UK are living with diabetes. That's huge. 4.4 million diagnosed. And then they think there's another 1.2 million people out there who have type 2 diabetes but don't even know it yet.
Wow.
Crazy, right? And then on top of that, another 3.2 million are at increased risk.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really highlights why understanding this whole link between exercise and diabetes is so important, for so many of us, whether it's for ourselves or people we care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And within that whole context, we're going to zero in on a real powerhouse in the body when it comes to keeping blood sugar in check. That is, of course, skeletal muscle.
Right.
So we'll explore how it normally handles glucose, what goes wrong in diabetes, and then most importantly, how exercise can help bring things back into balance.
Yeah, great. Okay, so before we get too deep into the nitty-gritty of it all, the science,
Sure.
let's just quickly define a few key terms. You hear these thrown around a lot when people are talking about diabetes.
Yeah.
Let's just make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, for sure.
So glucose, basically it's sugar. It's our body's main source of energy, and it comes from, the food we eat, and it circulates in our blood. Then we've got insulin. That's a hormone that's produced by the pancreas. Think of insulin like a key. It unlocks our cells and lets that glucose get in to be used for energy.
Yeah, perfect analogy.
Right.
And when those cells become less responsive to that insulin signal, that's what we call insulin resistance.
Okay.
Now, it's a really complex process and it involves a bunch of different factors, but you can think of it like that key not quite fitting the lock anymore.
Right.
So the glucose can't get in as easily and it starts building up in the blood.
Okay.
And this insulin resistance thing, it's a key feature of type 2 diabetes, which, like we mentioned earlier, accounts for about 90% of diabetes cases here in the UK. It's a long-term condition, and it's characterized by those high blood sugar levels that we talked about, and often over time, a decline in the body's ability to produce enough insulin.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Now, another term that you'll hear a lot is mitochondria.
These are like these tiny energy factories inside our cells. We'll call them the powerhouses.
Right.
They're basically in charge of breaking down those nutrients like glucose
Right.
to make energy for our bodies.
Exactly.
Then there's glucose regulation, which is just, the body's system for keeping blood sugar levels stable. A delicate balancing act between, glucose entering the bloodstream and being absorbed by the cells, with insulin playing a crucial role in all that. Oh, and one more important one, GLUT4.
Yes.
Think of that as a doorway
Okay.
on the surface of muscle and fat cells that lets glucose in.
Yep.
And it gets activated by both insulin and exercise.
Exactly.
So with those kind of fundamental terms in mind, let's really get into the central role of skeletal muscle.
Okay.
Because the research shows that your skeletal muscles are responsible for clearing out a significant amount of glucose from your blood after you eat. Up to 80% of it, actually.
Ooh.
That's a primary way your body deals with that, rise in blood sugar after a meal. So like the body's main glucose disposal unit.
Exactly. Our muscles are kind of like the glucose vacuum cleaners.
Okay.
But in type 2 diabetes, something disrupts this crucial process.
Yeah.
So what's going on there?
Well, that's where insulin resistance comes back into the picture. Because the cells are less responsive to insulin,
Right.
that key isn't working as well. And that includes your muscle cells.
Okay.
And remember GLUT4, those doorways for glucose.
Yeah.
Well, in type 2 diabetes, both the number of these GLUT4 transporters and how well they work can be impaired.
Okay.
So even if there's insulin around, or even with the signal from exercise,
Right.
those doorways aren't opening up as efficiently to let the glucose into the muscle cells.
So the glucose just kind of gets stuck in the bloodstream, and that leads to those high blood sugar levels.
Exactly.
Okay, that really paints a clear picture of the problem. So how does exercise come into play as a solution here?
Yeah.
It's not insulin.
Right.
So how does it help the muscles take up that glucose?
This is where it gets really, really interesting. The research shows that both aerobic exercise, so things like walking, cycling, swimming,
Right.
and resistance training, like weightlifting or using your own body weight,
Yeah.
they actually stimulate glucose uptake through pathways that are totally independent of insulin.
Oh, wow.
It's like discovering a secret back door for the glucose to get into those muscle cells.
So like an alternative route.
Exactly. And it's exciting because it means that even when the body's main system for managing glucose is kind of struggling because of insulin resistance,
Yeah.
we've got this built-in backup mechanism that exercise can really kick into gear.
Okay, so an alternative route for glucose uptake.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
So how does that actually happen in our bodies?
What's going on when we start moving that helps those muscles grab that extra glucose? So a few really important things happen. First of all, exercise dramatically increases blood flow to your muscles. This means that both insulin and glucose can be delivered to the muscle cells more effectively. Think of it like upgrading your delivery service.
Right.
Secondly, regular exercise actually leads to an increase in what we call capillary density around your muscles. Capillaries are those tiny blood vessels.
Right.
So more capillaries means a larger surface area for glucose to be delivered and taken up by the cells.
Okay.
It's like building more roads leading to those muscle cells.
Right, so better delivery and more access points.
Exactly.
The research also talked about acute versus long-term effects of exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference between those immediate benefits and the more sustained benefits for glucose management?
Okay, so acute exercise, like going for a brisk walk just after you've eaten,
Right.
creates an immediate demand for glucose to use as fuel.
Yeah.
Your muscles are working, they need energy, so they start pulling in glucose from the bloodstream straight away. And this helps to lower blood sugar levels in the short term. However, if you're exercising consistently over a longer period, that's when you start to see more profound changes.
Okay.
It actually improves insulin sensitivity overall,
Right.
meaning your cells get better at responding to insulin over time. And it also boosts the efficiency of those mitochondrial powerhouses, remember those, in your muscle cells.
Yeah, the energy factories.
Exactly.
So it's like a double whammy.
Yeah.
Immediate glucose use and long-term improvements in how our bodies handle insulin and glucose.
It really is.
It's a really
Yeah.
powerful impact. And I really like that phrase in the research. Your muscles, your medicine.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It really highlights how active a role our muscles can play in managing our health.
It does, and it's a really insightful way of looking at it. But the research also digs deeper into what exactly goes wrong at a cellular level in diabetes.
Right.
You know, what hinders this whole process.
Yeah.
And it's not just about insulin resistance.
Right. The research mentioned changes in something called the extracellular matrix.
Right.
And some byproducts.
Yes.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit.
Right.
What is the extracellular matrix, and how can that actually get in the way of glucose being taken up?
Right. So think of the extracellular matrix as like a network of molecules.
Okay.
It surrounds and supports your muscle cells, kind of like the environment that they live in.
Right.
And when there's chronically high blood sugar, this environment can change in ways that make it tougher for glucose to actually penetrate into the muscle tissue.
Oh, okay.
Even when insulin is there, it's as if the pathways, that alternative route that we talked about, are getting blocked somehow.
So it's like a physical barrier is developing.
Yeah, you could say that.
And what about those byproducts from fat processing? How do they add to the problem?
Okay, so in diabetes, there can be some shifts in how the body metabolizes fats.
Right.
And this can lead to a buildup of certain fatty substances within the muscle cells. And these substances can interfere with insulin signaling pathways, you know, the communication system that tells the cell to open those GLUT4 doorways.
Right.
So it's not just a problem with the doorways themselves, but with the instructions to open them as well.
So it's a double whammy at the cellular level.
Yeah,
The glucose can't get in as easily, and the signals telling it to get in are all messed up.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a great explanation of those challenges. And then the research circled back to the mitochondria,
Yes.
the powerhouses. You said their efficiency can be reduced in diabetes. So how does exercise help get them back on track?
Yeah, so in diabetes, those mitochondria and muscle cells, they often become less efficient at using glucose for energy.
Okay.
But Exercise is like a super stimulant for what we call mitochondrial biogenesis. Basically, it helps the body make more mitochondria, and it improves how well the existing ones work. So you end up with more powerhouses, and they're all running more efficiently.
So more powerhouses, and they're better at using glucose.
Exactly.
It all links together. Okay, so we've covered the science, the cellular changes, and how exercise counteracts them.
Right.
Now let's talk about what people can actually do.
Yeah, let's get practical.
Based on the research, what are some concrete steps our listener can take based on all this?
Well, the research points to a few key things you can start doing right away. First and foremost, get moving.
Yeah, I like that.
Like we've discussed, both aerobic exercise and resistance training have big benefits.
Yeah.
Think about activities you enjoy, like a brisk walk, a bike ride, a swim.
Yeah.
Those are all fantastic for your heart, lungs, and they encourage your muscles to take up glucose.
Right.
But don't forget about building muscle strength through resistance training. That could be lifting weights, using resistance bands, or even just body weight exercises like push-ups and squats.
Right.
Building muscle actually helps increase the number of those GLUT4 transporters in your muscles, which is great for long-term glucose regulation.
So it's not just about getting your heart rate up. Building and maintaining muscle is a big part of it too.
Exactly.
And the research really emphasized consistency over pushing yourself to the limit every time, right?
Yeah, consistency is key. You don't have to do these crazy long, intense workouts. If that seems too much, break it down into shorter, more frequent sessions. Even a 10-minute walk after each meal can make a difference in your glucose levels.
Right.
It's about making movement a regular part of your day, something that you can stick with.
That definitely sounds less intimidating than spending hours at the gym.
Yeah, for sure.
What other advice did the research have?
Okay, well, pay attention to what you're eating.
Right.
Exercise works best when it's paired with a balanced diet.
Okay.
Focus on eating complex carbohydrates, lean proteins, and healthy fats.
Yeah.
And try not to overload on simple sugars, which can cause those rapid spikes in blood glucose.
Right, right.
The research also suggests keeping track of your progress. Checking your blood sugar levels before and after exercise can give you some really useful insights into how your body is responding.
Okay.
And it's a good idea to share this info with your doctor so they can help you, tailor your approach.
Yeah.
And finally, think about connecting with your community. Joining support groups or fitness classes can provide some great social support and make it easier to stick to an exercise routine.
These are all really practical things that people can do.
Yeah.
It's encouraging to see how the research translates into real-life actions that we can all take.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who are interested in the specifics of the research, the source we've been looking at is a study published in Nutrients in 2022.
Okay.
The authors are Nicholas A. Hollett, Rebecca L. Scalzo, and Janie B. Roche. They took a pretty comprehensive approach, didn't they?
They did. They looked at data from both human and animal studies
Right.
to get a really good understanding of how skeletal muscle takes up glucose, how diabetes messes with that whole process, and how exercise can help reverse those changes.
And their main focus was on those cellular pathways involved in glucose uptake.
Exactly.
Effects of diabetes on how muscles function.
Yep.
And the role of exercise in getting things back in balance.
That's right.
It's helpful to understand the science behind it all. But of course, like all research, there are limitations or things that still need to be explored.
Right.
And the source did touch on some of those too, giving a balanced perspective.
Yeah. They noted that a lot of the studies they reviewed focused mainly on the short-term benefits of exercise.
Okay.
And there's definitely a need for more research on how long those effects last in the long run.
Right.
Plus, the people participating in those different studies were quite varied, which can make it a bit tricky to draw very specific conclusions that apply to everyone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And lastly, they pointed out that we still need a deeper understanding of the subtle differences between how aerobic and resistance training impact glucose management.
Right. So there's still more to learn.
Yeah.
But it's important to have that balanced understanding and to know that the science is always moving forward. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the power of exercise for managing diabetes, it really underscores what we're trying to do here. Taking complex research and making it accessible and easy to understand.
Exactly.
And that's precisely what we do at Boost UV. We might not be doing the original research ourselves, but we work hard to break down those important health and wellness topics into simpler terms that you can actually use.
Yeah, absolutely. We hope this deep dive has shed some light on the critical role your muscles play in regulating glucose.
Yeah.
And how exercise can be such a powerful, drug-free tool in managing type 2 diabetes. It's all about giving you the knowledge to make positive changes.
And if you found this helpful and you want to keep getting these kinds of simplified explanations of important health and wellness topics,
Yeah.
we'd love for you to sign up for our free weekly newsletter at boosttb.com. We're always digging into the latest research
Right.
to bring you the most relevant and practical info in a way that's easy to understand.
So to sum it all up, remember the key message here. Exercise isn't just about managing your weight or getting fit.
Right.
It has a direct impact on how your muscles handle glucose.
Right?
It enhances glucose uptake and makes your mitochondria work better. Keep that phrase in mind. Your muscles, your medicine.
Yeah, I love that. And on that note, here's a final thought to leave you with. If exercise can have such a profound effect at a cellular level, what other seemingly simple lifestyle changes might be having surprisingly big effects on our health? And how can we get better at understanding and making the most of those? It's something to think about as you continue on your journey toward better health. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.